Focusing on yourself isn't selfish, it's neurological alignment. When your brain is flooded with external noise, opinions, judgments, constant comparison, it loses its ability to regulate dopamine and motivation. Self-focus recenters attention in the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for decision-making and long-term planning. Silence becomes the environment where your nervous system rebalances. You're not ignoring the world, you're training your neural circuits to prioritize clarity over chaos. Silence is not the absence of communication, it's the foundation of mastery. In silence, your brain enters a reflective mode called the default mode network, where you process information deeply and connect experiences to meaning. This is where identity is built. Most people fear silence because it forces them to face themselves, but that's exactly where true adaptation happens. Every moment of silence strengthens emotional regulation, resilience, and focus. Human beings are wired to seek social feedback. It's how our species evolved. But when external validation becomes your primary source of motivation, your dopamine reward system becomes fragile, you become reactive instead of proactive. The goal is to build intrinsic dopamine loops, rewarding yourself not for attention or applause, but for progress, effort, and consistency. Detachment doesn't mean indifference, it means stability. When your worth isn't dependent on others, you gain complete cognitive freedom. There's a powerful kind of discipline that grows in solitude. When you isolate your focus, you train the anterior cingulate cortex, the part of your brain responsible for sustained attention and error detection. You become more aware of what distracts you and more intentional about what deserves your time. Solitude teaches your nervous system to be calm under pressure, to act without overthinking, to build a bias toward execution instead of reaction. That's where transformation begins, not in the crowd, but in quiet consistency. Energy is not just physical, it's neural. Every distraction drains cognitive energy. Every moment of focused attention builds it back. By focusing on yourself, you conserve dopamine, serotonin, and adrenaline for what truly matters. You stop scattering your mental resources and start building a concentrated force of willpower. Over time, this creates neuroplastic change. Your brain literally rewires to prefer effort, silence, and focus over chaos and distraction. That's how you evolve. Focusing on yourself is not about isolation or arrogance. It's about restoring the precision of your mind. Every day, your brain is assaulted with inputs, social media notifications, people's opinions, expectations, and endless comparisons. Each one competes for your attention, fragmenting your focus and draining your mental energy. The prefrontal cortex, the brain's control center for decision-making, planning, and attention, starts to lose its rhythm when it's overstimulated by external noise. You may notice this as fatigue, anxiety, or indecision, but what's actually happening is a neurological imbalance. The mind is spread too thin, and its natural circuitry for clarity begins to dull. When you start focusing on yourself, you reverse this process. You begin to reclaim ownership of your attention, and attention is the most valuable currency your brain possesses. The act of self-focus strengthens neural pathways that regulate motivation and emotional stability. Your dopamine system, the network that drives you to pursue goals and rewards, depends on where your attention goes. When your focus is fragmented by outside validation, your dopamine spikes are shallow and unsustainable. You feel brief moments of satisfaction followed by longer periods of emptiness. But when you redirect that attention inward, toward your own growth, the brain starts creating deeper and more stable dopamine loops. You stop chasing quick hits of approval and start building long-term motivation based on progress and effort. This shift is not just psychological, it's chemical. Your brain begins to prefer consistency over chaos, growth over distraction. When you give yourself permission to focus inward, you quiet the external world enough for the internal one to organize itself. The nervous system thrives on predictability and control. When it's constantly reacting to unpredictable inputs, it becomes overstimulated and fatigued. By focusing on yourself, you give the nervous system a stable rhythm to follow. The more you direct attention toward your actions, habits, and mindset, the more your body learns to operate from a state of calm alertness rather than stress. This is not about withdrawing from others, it's about recalibrating your internal environment so you can respond to life with precision instead of impulse. Neuroscience shows that attention is a limited resource. The more divided it becomes, the less effective you are at anything meaningful. The human brain is designed to perform at its highest potential when it is immersed in a single objective, not scattered across 1,000 distractions. Self-focus is the act of reclaiming that immersion. It's training your mind to filter out noise and sharpen its lens. Over time, this changes how you perceive challenges. Instead of being overwhelmed by the complexity of life, you begin to notice patterns and principles. You start to understand that progress is not a result of luck or external help. It's the byproduct of controlled attention and effort directed inward. There's also a deeper biological truth here. The brain doesn't just record experiences, it reorganizes itself around what you pay attention to. Every thought, every action, every focus point sends a signal that tells your neurons which pathways to strengthen and which to let fade. This process, known as neuroplasticity, is the essence of personal transformation. When your focus is external, on others' success, criticism, or validation, your brain is literally wiring itself to depend on those external cues. But when you turn that focus inward, you start wiring your brain for self-sufficiency. You create internal reference points for success, and that's when growth becomes sustainable. Focusing on yourself also activates the systems in the brain responsible for self-reflection and long-term vision. The prefrontal cortex, when engaged properly, connects your present actions to your future identity. It helps you align daily habits with long-term purpose. But it can't do that if it's constantly reacting to what everyone else is doing. Silence and solitude give it space to function at its best. This is why so many people only realize their true goals when they step away from the noise, because the brain finally has enough bandwidth to process what truly matters. Self-focus teaches you to move from reaction to intention. Instead of being pulled by the world, you begin to guide yourself through it. Your nervous system becomes more resilient. You stop flinching at criticism, stop comparing yourself, stop overanalyzing how others perceive you. You begin to measure your worth through effort, not applause. This internal stability allows your brain to regulate emotions more effectively. The amygdala, the part of your brain that processes fear and threat, becomes less reactive when your prefrontal cortex is strong. In other words, the more you focus on yourself, the calmer and more decisive you become under pressure. From a psychological standpoint, focusing on yourself also improves emotional intelligence. When you spend time analyzing your reactions and behaviors, you start to understand what triggers your stress, motivation, and joy. This awareness lets you modify your internal dialogue and reshape the beliefs that hold you back. The process is not comfortable because it involves confronting your weaknesses and biases, but that's where transformation begins. Silence plays an essential role here. When you remove external stimulation, the mind surfaces what it needs to face. That discomfort is a signal that your brain is reorganizing itself for greater clarity and strength. Self-focus is not an act of isolation. It's the foundation for contribution. You can't lead, create, or support others effectively if your internal world is chaotic. By centering your focus inward, you build the emotional and cognitive stability required to engage with the world powerfully. Your focus becomes a form of self-respect. It tells your brain that your goals, your peace, and your purpose matter enough to protect your attention. Over time, this becomes a lifestyle. You stop chasing distraction and you start designing your environment to support your focus, limiting unnecessary noise, optimizing your routines, and surrounding yourself with people who respect your silence. This discipline changes how your brain interprets reward. You begin to feel satisfaction not from comparison, but from growth. You notice small improvements in how you think, how you react, how you perform. That feedback loop between effort and reward becomes your source of motivation. It's what makes you wake up driven, not because someone expects it, but because your brain has learned to associate focus with fulfillment. That's when self-focus stops being a strategy and becomes your natural state of being. Silence is not emptiness. It is the environment where transformation begins. When you remove external noise, the constant talking, scrolling, and reacting, you create a neurological space for growth. The brain, when left undistracted, naturally enters a state of introspection called the default mode network. This network activates when you're not focused on the outside world, allowing your mind to reflect, make connections, and process experiences deeply. In that quiet state, the brain organizes chaos into clarity. It takes scattered thoughts and turns them into understanding. Silence isn't just an emotional need. It's a biological requirement for self-evolution. Most people misunderstand silence. They think of it as an absence of sound or movement, but in reality, silence is a powerful form of activity. It's your nervous system recalibrating, your thoughts reorganizing, and your emotional circuits finding balance. When you spend time in silence, your brain shifts from the high alert of the sympathetic nervous system into the calm and restorative parasympathetic state. That shift allows your mind and body to repair themselves. It's in this quiet space that your creativity expands, your awareness deepens, and your inner voice becomes louder. Silence teaches you to listen to your instincts, to your emotions, to the signals your body gives you that you often ignore when life is noisy. Every day, people drown in overstimulation. They fill every spare moment with noise, music, podcasts, conversations, social media, anything to avoid stillness. But the reason silence feels uncomfortable at first is because it reveals what's underneath the distractions. The unprocessed emotions, the unresolved goals, the questions you've avoided answering. When you remove noise, you meet yourself. That's where growth begins. Not in the moment of distraction, but in the confrontation with truth. The human brain is wired to seek certainty and comfort, but silence pushes you into uncertainty. It challenges your assumptions and forces the brain to adapt, to grow new neural connections that handle discomfort with strength instead of avoidance. When you practice silence deliberately, you teach your brain to be comfortable with introspection. You start observing your thoughts without judgment, seeing patterns in how you think, react, and behave. That awareness strengthens the prefrontal cortex, which improves emotional regulation and focus. Over time, your inner dialogue changes. Instead of reacting impulsively to external events, you begin responding from a place of calm understanding. Silence sharpens your perception, not just of yourself, but of the world. You start noticing the subtleties, tone, emotion, energy, because your brain is no longer flooded with unnecessary input. Silence is also a form of discipline. It's easy to speak, easy to react, easy to fill the void with noise. It's much harder to sit in stillness and observe what emerges. When you choose silence over constant engagement, you are training your mind to control impulse. You are teaching your nervous system to delay response, to stay calm in uncertainty, and to resist the pull of external validation. That self-control is one of the most powerful forms of growth. It strengthens your mental endurance and builds resilience, both of which are essential for progress. The greatest clarity, the most transformative ideas, and the deepest healing always emerge from periods of silence, not from chaos. From a neurological perspective, silence enhances your ability to learn and retain information. When you give your brain moments of stillness, it consolidates memories, connects new information with old knowledge, and strengthens neural pathways. That's why some of your best insights come when you're quiet, walking alone, sitting without your phone, or simply breathing in stillness. In silence, the brain integrates experiences that were previously fragmented. You begin to see your life not as random moments, but as a coherent path, one that reveals direction and meaning. This understanding brings a sense of peace because it replaces confusion with comprehension. Silence also improves emotional stability. In a world driven by reaction, arguments, debates, instant opinions, silence becomes a superpower. When you don't rush to respond, you give your amygdala time to settle, allowing your prefrontal cortex to assess situations with clarity. That pause is where wisdom grows. You begin to understand that not everything requires a reaction, that many conflicts dissolve when met with quiet strength instead of noise. This mental habit rewires your stress response. You stop being controlled by external triggers and start mastering your internal state. There's another dimension to silence. It strengthens authenticity. When you spend time alone in quiet reflection, you strip away the layers of influence that society, peers, and culture place on you. You start to hear your own voice again, the one that gets buried beneath noise. That voice holds your true values, your real priorities, and your deepest motivations. Listening to it regularly aligns your life with your purpose. You stop acting out of pressure or expectation and start acting out of conviction. Silence reconnects you with who you are when no one is watching, and that connection is the foundation of integrity. Many people associate growth with constant movement, constant productivity. But the brain doesn't grow in chaos. It grows in cycles of stress and rest, effort and silence. Just as muscles require recovery to strengthen, your neural circuits need stillness to expand. Without silence, effort becomes burnout. With silence, effort becomes mastery. This rhythm, focus followed by reflection, is what leads to long-term growth. It allows your nervous system to adapt without breaking. It gives your mind space to innovate, to imagine new possibilities, and to see solutions that can't be seen in noise. Silence also deepens your relationship with time. When you are constantly stimulated, time feels like it's rushing by. You jump from one moment to the next, rarely feeling present. But when you sit in silence, even for a few minutes, time slows down. Your awareness expands. You begin to notice details, the rhythm of your breath, the tension in your body, the subtle movement of thoughts. This heightened awareness grounds you in the present moment, which is where real power lies. Presence is what allows you to perform with precision, to connect deeply, to live intentionally. Practicing silence doesn't require isolation. It's not about escaping from the world. It's about learning to carry quietness within you. You can be surrounded by people and still be internally silent. That means your attention is steady, your emotions are stable, and your thoughts are organized. This kind of inner silence builds confidence. It allows you to walk through chaos without losing yourself. You stop absorbing other people's energy, opinions, and emotions. You become centered, grounded, and self-directed. That's the ultimate growth, when silence becomes your default mode, not your escape. The power of silence lies in what it reveals. It uncovers the parts of yourself you've ignored, the dreams you've postponed, the fears you've buried. It shows you what truly matters and what doesn't. In that awareness, you grow, not by adding more, but by removing what no longer serves you. Silence becomes the teacher that no one else can replace, the one that doesn't speak, but transforms everything it touches. Every human being has a deep biological drive to belong. From the earliest stages of life, our brains were wired to seek approval, because acceptance once meant survival. The same mechanisms that once kept our ancestors safe in groups now govern how modern people behave on social media, in careers, and relationships. Every time someone likes, praises, or recognizes you, your brain releases a small burst of dopamine, the chemical that signals reward and motivation. The problem begins when these dopamine hits become your main source of fulfillment. Over time, you start building your sense of worth around what others think, not what you truly are. This dependence on external validation creates instability in your motivation and emotional health. You rise and fall with the opinions of others, and that constant fluctuation keeps you from real growth. When your brain becomes conditioned to external reward, you lose control over your dopamine system. It becomes reactive instead of proactive. That's when you start to chase approval instead of progress. You post something, you work harder, you try to be noticed, not because it aligns with your purpose, but because your brain is craving that validation loop. This creates a fragile identity. You feel valuable only when recognized, and when the recognition fades, so does your confidence. The key to breaking this cycle lies in detaching from external validation and shifting toward intrinsic motivation. That means rewiring your brain to find satisfaction in effort itself rather than applause. The dopamine must be generated from within. When you focus on internal validation, you begin building stable neural circuits. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision making and self-control, strengthens its influence over the limbic system, the emotional core of the brain. This balance gives you emotional stability. You stop being pulled by external noise and start making decisions aligned with your long-term values. You no longer feel compelled to prove yourself in every situation because your confidence is built on evidence you create through discipline and progress. Internal validation becomes your compass. You start to feel good because you followed through on a commitment, not because someone noticed it. Detachment from external validation doesn't mean isolation or indifference. It means independence. It's about teaching your brain to stay motivated without constant feedback. This independence is deeply neurological. When you stop reacting to praise and criticism with the same emotional intensity, your brain becomes less dependent on dopamine spikes. It begins to favor steady, sustainable motivation instead of short-lived highs. That shift transforms how you work, how you learn, and how you grow. You begin to move through life with quiet confidence rather than anxious energy. The truth is, external validation is never consistent. People's opinions are influenced by their own experiences, biases, and emotions. things that have nothing to do with your worth. When you let those opinions control your sense of self, you're allowing your nervous system to be dictated by randomness. One person's comment can raise your mood, another's silence can lower it. Over time, this constant fluctuation creates stress, your cortisol levels rise, your focus declines, and your motivation burns out. Detachment restores balance. It teaches your nervous system to remain steady regardless of what the outside world says or does. Psychologically, detachment strengthens self-awareness. When you stop chasing validation, you start observing why you wanted it in the first place. Maybe it was to feel loved, respected, or seen. By identifying the core need behind your actions, you start addressing it from within instead of outsourcing it. You realize that confidence is not something given, it's something trained. It's built through repetition, consistency, and honesty with yourself. This understanding shifts your entire perception of progress. You begin to measure success not by recognition, but by alignment with your own values. The process of detachment also sharpens focus. When you are no longer distracted by how others perceive you, you free up immense cognitive energy. The brain has a limited bandwidth for attention, and when that attention is consumed by self-conscious thoughts, there's little left for creativity, strategy, or deep work. But once you release the need for validation, your mind becomes clearer. You start performing tasks with more intensity and less hesitation because your attention is directed fully toward the process. You stop holding back out of fear of judgment and start engaging with life more authentically. There's also a physiological side to this transformation. The body's stress response is triggered not only by danger, but by perceived social threats, criticism, rejection, or embarrassment. These activate the same pathways as physical pain. That's why being ignored or criticized can feel unbearable. But when you train yourself to detach, your brain begins to interpret these experiences differently. The amygdala, which processes emotional reactions, sends fewer panic signals. Your parasympathetic nervous system activates faster, helping you stay calm and rational even in moments of social pressure. Over time, you become emotionally resilient, able to stand firm even when misunderstood. The most powerful thing about detachment is that it shifts your relationship with effort. When you no longer rely on validation, you start to appreciate the process itself. Every repetition, every small improvement, every challenge faced becomes its own reward. You begin to understand that the real dopamine rush comes not from being noticed, but from growing stronger. This is the essence of intrinsic motivation. Your brain starts to release dopamine when you make progress, not when you're praised for it. That internal loop builds consistency, which becomes unstoppable momentum. In silence and solitude, this detachment deepens. When you spend time alone, without external reinforcement, you force your brain to create its own sense of satisfaction. You reflect on what truly matters, what goals are genuinely yours, and what habits you've been maintaining only for others' approval. That clarity gives you freedom. You stop wasting energy on impressing people who don't matter and start investing it in becoming the person you're proud of in private. Detachment becomes a form of power, the kind that can't be taken away because it's built entirely within. When you practice this mental discipline long enough, your identity stabilizes. You no longer need to prove yourself. You simply express yourself. You no longer perform for validation. You act from conviction. The noise of judgment loses its volume because your brain has adapted to tune it out. You start to move through life guided by internal cues. What feels aligned? What feels meaningful? What challenges you to grow? You're no longer chasing, you're creating. That's when detachment becomes not a withdrawal from life, but a mastery of it. Solitude is not loneliness. It is the environment where discipline takes its purest form. When you strip away distractions, when the noise fades and no one is watching, you meet the raw truth of who you are. Most people only associate discipline with effort, waking up early, working hard, following routines. But true discipline begins in solitude. It's the ability to guide your thoughts, emotions, and actions without external pressure or encouragement. The brain learns to self-regulate when there's no audience to impress and no immediate reward to chase. In that quiet space, the anterior cingulate cortex, the region responsible for sustained attention and error detection, becomes stronger. It learns to stay locked onto goals even when motivation fluctuates. Solitude becomes the gym where mental endurance is built. When you spend time alone intentionally, your brain shifts into a deeper state of awareness. Without constant input from the outside world, your mind starts to analyze your habits, thoughts, and patterns of behavior. You begin to see what drives you and what distracts you. This self-observation is crucial for discipline because you can't control what you don't understand. Solitude removes the camouflage of business and shows you where your inconsistencies lie. It exposes whether your actions are aligned with your goals or merely a reaction to external forces. That awareness transforms discipline from something forced into something chosen. You no longer need to push yourself out of fear or guilt. You act from clarity. Neuroscience shows that consistent behavior in solitude rewires the brain for focus. Each time you return to a task without external motivation, your neural circuits strengthen the association between effort and satisfaction. You begin to rely less on emotional highs and more on internal structure. This stability creates resilience. You can maintain performance even when circumstances change because your discipline is not dependent on environment. The solitude acts like controlled stress. It challenges the mind to stay engaged without stimulation, training your neural pathways to resist distraction and fatigue. That's why many of the world's most effective thinkers, athletes, and creators spend deliberate time alone. They understand that solitude is not withdrawal, it's calibration. Time slows down enough for you to see the relationship between your decisions and your results. You start recognizing how small choices accumulate into habits and how habits shape identity. This realization builds accountability. When you're alone, there's no one else to blame for your progress or lack of it. That accountability sharpens your character. It pushes you to take ownership of your time, your mindset, and your effort. You start to develop a kind of internal authority, a voice that directs you even when the world is silent. That voice becomes the core of discipline. It reminds you of what matters when you feel distracted or tired. Discipline in solitude also strengthens emotional regulation. When you remove external stimulation, you force your brain to face boredom, discomfort, and restlessness. These emotions are not enemies. They are opportunities. Each time you resist the urge to escape into distraction, your prefrontal cortex gains more control over the limbic system, the emotional brain. That's how you build impulse control. The ability to stay still, to stay focused, to stay calm under internal pressure is what separates temporary effort from lasting discipline. Solitude gives you the conditions to practice this control repeatedly until it becomes automatic. When you rely on external motivation, praise, competition, or attention, you give away your power. You allow your nervous system to be directed by the environment instead of your intention. Solitude reverses this dependency. It forces you to generate your own drive. In those moments when no one sees your work, no one acknowledges your effort, and no one celebrates your discipline, you discover whether your commitment is genuine. That is where identity and integrity align. The quiet repetition of effort in solitude forms the foundation of unstoppable momentum. There's also a biological side to why solitude strengthens discipline. When you remove constant social interaction and stimulation, your dopamine system recalibrates. The brain begins to find reward in focus itself rather than in novelty. This means you start enjoying deep work, training, or study not because of external recognition, but because your neural chemistry now values the process. That internal reward system is the key to consistency. It allows you to sustain effort even when progress feels invisible. Over time, your brain rewires to prefer structure over chaos, control over reaction, creation over distraction. Solitude refines clarity. When your attention isn't being pulled in 1,000 directions, your goals become sharper. You stop chasing everything and start pursuing only what truly aligns with your values. This clarity is not just mental, it's physiological. The brain's networks responsible for attention and planning synchronize when distractions are minimized. You can feel it when it happens. The noise inside your head quiets, your breathing slows, and you enter a state of flow. In that state, discipline no longer feels like struggle, it feels like momentum. The brain loves that state because it's efficient. It rewards you for sustained focus with feelings of satisfaction and progress. Solitude also teaches patience. In a world addicted to speed, solitude reminds you that growth takes time. The neural circuits responsible for long-term behavior change require repetition and rest. You can't rush transformation, but you can remain consistent. Discipline is not about intensity, it's about longevity. Every time you choose structure over impulse, every time you honor your schedule when no one's watching, You're strengthening neural pathways that make future effort easier. That's the unseen part of discipline, what happens in the silence between visible results. In moments of solitude, you also reconnect with meaning. Discipline without purpose turns into rigidity, but discipline with purpose becomes powerful. When you have quiet space to reflect, you remember why you started. You reconnect with your goals not as obligations, but as expressions of who you want to become. That emotional clarity fuels persistence. It gives your effort direction. Without solitude, that connection fades because you're constantly reacting to the world instead of listening to yourself. With solitude, you anchor your discipline in intention rather than pressure. Eventually, solitude becomes something you crave, not avoid. It becomes the sanctuary where you reset your mind, refine your goals, and restore your energy. The quiet no longer feels empty, it feels productive. It becomes the proof of your self-sufficiency, the evidence that your motivation doesn't depend on anyone else's approval or presence. That realization changes everything. You start to understand that discipline is not just about action, it's about alignment. It's the state of being where your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors move in the same direction, regardless of who's watching. Energy is not just something you have or don't have, it's something your brain creates through direction and purpose. Every moment of scattered attention drains your mental and physical energy, while every moment of focused intention replenishes it. The brain runs on limited resources, glucose, oxygen, and neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. When your attention is fragmented across distractions, your nervous system expends these resources inefficiently. You feel drained, unfocused, and restless not because you've done too much, but because you've done too little of what truly matters. Focus acts as the filter that conserves and redirects this biological energy. By learning to focus deeply, you literally rebuild your mental and physical strength from the inside out. The brain rewards focus with clarity. When you commit your attention to a single task or goal, your prefrontal cortex synchronizes with deeper brain structures, creating a powerful feedback loop between effort and satisfaction. This loop releases dopamine, the chemical of motivation and reward. But unlike the fleeting dopamine spikes that come from distraction or external validation, focus-driven dopamine is stable and sustainable. It gives you energy instead of taking it away. You begin to feel more alive, not because something outside of you has changed, but because your brain is operating at peak efficiency. In this state, time seems to slow, your mind sharpens, and even difficult work starts to feel meaningful. Most people lose energy not from exertion, but from internal conflict. The brain burns massive energy when it's caught between competing thoughts, what you want to do versus what you think you should do. Focus resolves that conflict by aligning attention with intention. It's a kind of mental precision that tells your brain, this is what we're doing now. Once that decision is made, your cognitive system becomes streamlined. Neural activity becomes organized, unnecessary pathways quiet down, and your effort becomes more efficient. You're no longer fighting yourself, you're cooperating with yourself. That cooperation is the foundation of mental energy. Every time you focus, you're training your brain's energy system. Focus activates the anterior cingulate cortex and basal ganglia, regions that regulate effort and persistence. The more you practice staying with one task, the stronger these regions become. It's similar to strengthening a muscle. Repetition creates endurance. This neurological endurance allows you to stay concentrated for longer periods without fatigue. You begin to experience what scientists call flow states, where your actions and awareness merge seamlessly. In this state, the brain releases a cocktail of neurochemicals, dopamine, norepinephrine, endorphins, that elevate mood and energy. What feels like effortlessness is actually the result of a highly disciplined focus system working at full capacity. When your mind is constantly jumping from one thing to another, your body follows. Your stress hormones rise, your breathing quickens, and your energy scatters. This is the physiological cost of distraction. Focus does the opposite. It slows down your breathing, stabilizes your heart rate, and restores coherence to your nervous system. This synchronization between mind and body is what creates vitality. The energy you feel after a day of focused work is not just psychological, it's biological. Your nervous system is balanced, your dopamine system is regulated, and your hormonal output is aligned with purpose rather than chaos. The act of rebuilding energy through focus also changes how you experience effort. Many people associate hard work with exhaustion because they've only experienced effort under distraction. True focus transforms that relationship. When you are deeply engaged in something meaningful, effort stops feeling like depletion and starts feeling like creation. You're generating energy as you work because the brain's reward systems are reinforcing your effort with dopamine and satisfaction. This is why people who are deeply passionate and disciplined often seem tireless. They're not depleting energy, they're recycling it through focus. Rebuilding energy requires protecting your attention like a resource. Every notification, every unnecessary conversation, every moment of reactive scrolling costs you focus units that could be spent on something significant. The human brain is not designed for constant multitasking. Each time you switch tasks, it takes time and energy for your neural circuits to refocus. Over hours and days, that switching cost accumulates into fatigue. By simplifying your focus, deciding what truly deserves your attention, you prevent this energy leakage. The mind becomes quieter, the body feels lighter, and your productivity increases not because you're doing more, but because you're wasting less. Focus also strengthens the relationship between your mind and motivation. When you repeatedly focus on a goal and see even small progress, your brain begins to associate effort with reward. This builds what neuroscientists call intrinsic motivation, the ability to feel energized by the process itself rather than the outcome. Once this loop is established, you no longer rely on external factors to stay driven. The energy comes from within. You wake up with purpose, you work with direction, and your body supports your mind because both are aligned toward the same aim. Another crucial element of focus-driven energy is rest. Focus is not about pushing relentlessly without pause, it's about cycling attention strategically. The brain operates best in rhythms, periods of deep work followed by deliberate rest. When you rest after focused effort, your brain consolidates what you've learned, repairs neural connections, and restores neurotransmitter balance. That's why taking breaks during focus training doesn't weaken discipline. It strengthens it. Each rest period allows your brain to rebuild energy reserves for the next wave of concentration. Over time, this rhythm creates sustainable productivity, not burnout. Silence plays a role here too. Focus thrives in silence because silence minimizes sensory load. When you create quiet spaces, physically and mentally, you give your nervous system room to recover. This is why people often describe their best ideas arriving when they're alone or in nature. In those moments, the brain's default mode network activates, linking past experiences with future possibilities. Focus and silence work together like inhale and exhale. One generates energy through effort, the other restores it through stillness. Both are essential for balance. The process of rebuilding energy through focus also extends to emotional regulation. When your attention is steady, your emotions stabilize. The prefrontal cortex maintains control over the amygdala, reducing reactivity. You waste less energy on anxiety, overthinking, and emotional turbulence because your mental spotlight stays on what you can control. This emotional discipline prevents energy leaks that often go unnoticed, the exhaustion that comes from rumination or frustration. With focus, you redirect that energy into progress. Over time, the practice of rebuilding energy through focus becomes self-sustaining. Your brain learns that deep engagement feels better than distraction, that calm productivity is more rewarding than chaotic stimulation. The pathways that once craved novelty and external input weaken, while those that thrive on discipline and intention strengthen. You start to feel a different kind of energy, not the restless kind that fades quickly, but the grounded kind that grows with purpose. The more you focus, the more energy you generate, and the more capable you become of handling complexity with calm precision. The entire journey of training your brain to love hard work is not about forcing effort or grinding endlessly. It's about transforming your relationship with effort itself. The human brain is wired to adapt, to rewire its circuits in response to consistent action and meaningful focus. Every keynote, from understanding motivation, building discipline, sustaining focus, cultivating resilience, and rebuilding energy, comes together as one unified principle. Effort is not the enemy, it is the signal for growth. When you learn to connect effort with reward, when you begin to see challenge as the pathway to expansion rather than a source of discomfort, you reprogram the deepest layers of your nervous system. This transformation doesn't happen through willpower alone, it happens through alignment. When your thoughts, Emotions and actions point in the same direction. Your brain and body move as one system of purpose. Each moment of resistance becomes an opportunity to strengthen neural connections for focus and endurance. Each period of fatigue becomes a signal to rest and rebuild, not to quit. You begin to understand that consistency is not about perfection, but about rhythm. The rhythm between action and recovery, between focus and reflection, between discipline and grace. The reward of this process is not only success in external pursuits, but mastery of your inner world. You develop emotional steadiness, mental clarity, and physical vitality. You stop chasing motivation and start generating it. You no longer need external validation to move forward because the source of drive exists within you. Every act of focused effort reinforces this internal engine, teaching your brain that hard work is not something to escape, it's something to embrace. In the end, training your brain to love hard work is training it to love growth. It's about realizing that the person you are becoming is built one deliberate effort at a time. It's about knowing that discipline creates freedom, that focus fuels energy, and that purpose transforms pain into progress. When you learn to find meaning in effort, every challenge becomes a chance to expand your potential. And as your brain learns to associate that process with fulfillment, you unlock a lifelong source of strength, an inner drive that no setback, distraction, or obstacle can ever take away.